Alrighty, so hello everyone. My name is Chris, and I will be your guide on your quest. And we're gonna be looking at making some miniature diorama. This is kind of the part 2 episode. So last month, and I'll show you in a minute here, we took a look at. Here we go. Sort of starting off making a diorama. So this is on YouTube, on the Sunland Sunspace YouTube channel. You can watch this. It's actually quite a bit longer than I'm planning to go for today. Today we're gonna be 25-30 minutes tops. But this one was a little bit longer and oops. And the idea was to kind of just talk about some materials, right? Plaster, rock molds, whatever. This is some extruded polystyrene foam that I'm cutting up with a hot wire cutter, and then it sort of takes you through pouring plaster on top and then carving it out. I give some critical feedback on my former self creating it, and yeah, so that's there. And I think, like I mentioned in the beginning of this this video, right, last month's art lab, there's some amazing stuff out there, educational information, resources for making this kind of thing. Oops, let me switch my yes. And yeah, so I have to give some shouts out.
Shouts out.
Shouts out Black Magic Craft and Real Terrain Hobbies.
Yeah, Black Magic Craft, Real Terrain Hobbies. I just, I feel like we're in some sort of strange mecca of hobbying with the ease of information, ease of access for information and tutorials and how-to stuff, right? From all this crafting, 3D modeling, building stuff. Like, I don't know, there's just so many. The standard of production, I guess, for YouTube channels and stuff is just kind of gone through the roof. So anyways, all I was trying to say is those channels are some I recommend if anyone's watching this, or you're watching this after the fact on YouTube and you want to get into it more. There's some really nice condensed videos where they're talking about specific materials and processes, and just sort of breaking everything down. My approach for that longer video that I just showed and then today's is a little bit less of a how-to and more just kind of introduction, showing almost from start to finish the process all sped up. A lot of the shorter videos, more instructional videos, it's kind of like a cooking show. They start something and then it cuts and the process is done. So I think, what you'll kind of see with this one is I pretty much captured everything, right? Between that last month's episode and this one that I'm about to show, you can really kind of see it all happen. It's just super sped up, and I kind of just wanted to be able to talk through it and almost give commentary. So yeah, it's broken up into 4 sections. So we're gonna start here. Let's do this. Okay. Alrighty. So this is the first section. It's about 10 minutes long of real-time video for us, and it's the basic painting. So, and then we're gonna have a second step, which is some special painting techniques. A third step is flocking, or adding some vegetation, and the fourth step is pouring some resin water, so some fake water effect kind of thing. So anyways, with the painting here, what I'm doing is sort of glazing some yellow. You can tell that, right? glazing some yellow color onto these rocks. And again, yeah, if you're not sure how I got here, check out that other video on YouTube, the episode 7 art lab. But yeah, this is basically a bunch of plaster, and I gessoed it, right? So gessoing or priming is a way to kind of apply a coat of a paint that is meant to allow additional layers of paint to sort of sit on top of it. And yeah, another really cool thing for me with this process was this is the first time I've used an airbrush. And yeah, a lot of this is sped up, but you'll see intermittently I slow it down to kind of more of a real-time speed so you can actually see the true way that this looks when I'm painting with this tool. But yeah, this was pretty amazing. I mean, I've painted so much with a paintbrush and crayons, markers, colored pencils, all of that stuff, but to have this device just, you know, shooting out this soft spray was really amazing. Definitely some technical hurdles to get used to, but once I got going, it was awesome. So yeah, this approach, you know, kind of layering in colors, right? I started with that yellow and then some gray and then some warmer, kind of redder or browner color. And I'm just kind of feeling it out. I mentioned a lot in that longer first video, last month's episode. You know, this piece I'm making, the one thing I kind of knew about it was that I wanted to feel flexible and I was willing to kind of commit to the long haul. And this sort of took like almost, let's see, like a month and a half or something. So it was a bigger piece. Definitely took longer than I'm used to. But part of that was because I didn't really come up with a specific plan to execute. I just sort of, you know, felt out a lot of the process. And definitely this part with the painting, you know, was an extension of that, where I'm just improvising and dropping colors in and, you know, seeing what's what. So I think what happened there was I actually jammed the airbrush, and that's why I went back to a normal brush here that night. Yeah, I learned a lot about the upkeep, but I hadn't learned that lesson here. So this is why the brush got jammed, and I was like, okay, I'll just drop some color in with the brush. Okay, back in fast mode. And yeah, this is how I've made pretty much all of the other dioramas in the past. And one of the issues, I think, or rather one of the advantages with the airbrush is, you know, plaster is, it's really fine and detailed, and it lets you achieve a lot of realism with the rocks and the effects and all of that. But it's super fragile. So when you're coming in here with the bristles and putting on this color, sometimes you can chip off pieces of the plaster. And then instead of this nice, gritty, realistic rock terrain texture, you have exposed this bright white, you know, plaster, right? That first step showing through again. So yeah, I thought kind of the hands-off approach, just blasting in that fine atomized pigment, was super cool for that reason too. To not, you know, have to be jamming a brush in there, trying to force paint in every nook and cranny. And what I'm doing here is dropping in some bits of sand. So this is something you can get at Home Depot or whatever kind of store. And it's called sanded grout. So it's this little particulate dirt kind of sand stuff. And it's used for, you know, construction and tiling and stuff. And I'm actually going to go back a little bit, rewatch part of that. Okay. So one more thing, I'm going to go back a little bit further, because one thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, this idea here of laying in colors from sort of the light to getting darker. That's a a very common approach, right? Even within, I can even poke myself in here in real time. Hello. So yeah, this sort of methodology is totally common in, I guess, representational painting as well, whether it's portraits or landscapes and things like that. And one of the neat things about it is paint often has an element of transparency to it. So if you're putting pigment like this yellow or gray on top of a bright white surface, whether it's plaster rock or a bright white, blank canvas or wood board or whatever, light in the room, in the space, will kind of travel and go through those layers of paint and sort of rebound off of that white base, and it can create a real luminous effect. So yeah, I don't know how deep to go into that in this episode or anything, but sometimes it could be nice to work from light to dark, because right, this is your one chance where the whole surface, the whole substrate is at its brightest. It's almost like this itself is the light source, or a light source. So glazing color can let you achieve this sort of bright, vibrant color, versus if we skipped ahead here where it's all darker, imagine trying to, get this yellow color here, right? We'd have to really mix up a thick, opaque, light yellow and then thickly apply that. And it would need to be so opaque and thick, right? The paint, right? That it could sort of be brighter than the darker base that it's on. And yeah, sometimes you can achieve that, but then the color won't be quite as bright and saturated. So, I mean, all in all, the effect I'm talking about, it hardly even shows up on camera like this. It's really something that is best observed in real life, in person. But I just thought I'd mention it. It's, as I'm exploring this new medium for me of a diorama and whatnot, it's kind of fun to track some of the parallels, I guess, between this and other forms of painting that I've done. Okay, so let's go back to here. Yeah, so I dropped in these little rocks on here. I was painting some green. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. This is going to be an island with water. So sort of the base rocks that are going to meet the water, I'm painting in this sort of algae type green. At least that's the idea. All right. And then, yeah, the grout, I'm kind of peppering it in almost to fill in gaps, right? Transitions. So if there's a rock and you can kind of see under it a lot, maybe I might fill some of that gap in with this sand. And, I'm trying to emulate the idea of real sand in the water. Okay, and then what I'm doing here, you can kind of ignore until we get to the third section of this workshop today, which will cover flocking. But again, to relate this type of work back to other forms of painting, I've heard this called, and I sort of referred to it in my brain, keying. So you do all this work, right? Taking it from white into some color, but sometimes it's hard to know what you have, Psychologically, I think there's a little bit of tunnel vision. You've just been staring at the same thing for a long time. It looks kind of cool, but I started to get the feeling like, this is all pretty bright. It's all pretty light still. And I know eventually I'm going to be putting in this flocking, right? Which is sort of fake or artificial vegetation. So keying, I think, to me means I'm not done painting all the rocks, but before I go any further, I'm just going to skip ahead and drop in some of the flocking, right? So here's my green moss, and that stuff I'm not going to be painting, right? The moss is moss, right? I'm pouring it out of its little container, and it's going to be that tonality, the tonality of green right there. So now that I've put that in, right, it kind of helps me notice, or it sort of exposes, oh wait, you know, a lot of that rock is pretty washed out still. So yeah, this is kind of a common thing to me, a common faux pas or an issue. And again, this goes back to maybe working from that super subtle light to dark, right? Another approach might have been, instead of building up so you can have that cool transparent glow effect, maybe this first pass should have been a base tone gray, just to get me in the ballpark. I think that would have saved more time. So yeah, you know, just something to keep in mind depending on the type of project. Is it a commission? Is it a personal exploration? Is there a deadline? Is there no deadline? What's your goal? You know, you can kind of then pick some of the different avenues, I think, of approaches to better suit your needs. And again, the one thing I knew for this piece was I'm going to try to take my time and just explore with it. So this approach of gradually building up the tones, even though it sort of cost me here, where I'm like, wait, I have to do it all over again. That was just what made sense to me. Alrighty, so sorry I'm pausing a lot here, but this little bit of footage where I air quote, you know, keyed the color by putting in the green to compare. This was also at night, and I work in a little garage studio space. So I think one thing you'll notice here, the next shot, it's going to be way brighter. So this is the same exact piece, except it's, you know, Saturday morning instead of Friday night. And the garage door is open, so there's just, you know, sunlight, skylight kind of coming in to the space. So pretty amazing, right? Just to compare those two. It's the same exact thing with different lighting. And that really exposed, you know, just how much of a little, I guess a bubble I was working in that night, right? Just, oh, you know, oh, this color, that color, when really its value range was all way too bright. So I think now you're going to see me kind of just try to get things up to speed a little bit darker. So one thing I was trying to do, and I've seen this on some of those channels that I mentioned, the Real Terrain Hobbies and stuff, who makes a lot of cool oceanic terrain. One way to sort of fake some depth in the ocean, which will eventually have resin poured on top of it, is to, you know, tone the edges of your water base, you know, the baseboard, with like a darker black color. So sort of the edges, right, the furthest parts away from the island, you can kind of see I'm really trying to punch them darker. Right, and then hopefully when the resin is poured, it will just appear like the ocean floor is, you know, lower there. And here I'm just sort of spreading some of that color up. And I think, you know, I consider that keying too, in terms of process. If you ever have a color, like say you're painting a portrait of someone with, I don't know, black hair or dark red hair or something, sometimes just mixing that really darkest dark color and plopping it in is a great way to sort of, you know, reset the relativity of the piece. And right, help you sort of then judge all of your other values off of that. So very repetitious here. I'm now kind of spraying in. I fixed my gun, spray gun, air gun, airbrush, and I'm spraying in some green again, and other colors too. And yeah, I think it's starting to kind of feel a lot closer to how I'd want it. Painting miniatures, I think, is interesting too, because on the one hand, you're not faking the illusion of depth like you are in a representational painting, because all of the space exists, right, physically in your piece. And yet you can still kind of exaggerate and tweak and push things, concepts of space even further with how you paint it. So if there's a cave or if there's some dark crevice and I've got a dark paint in my air gun, you could maybe spray that darkness into that pit and just further exaggerate the idea of, lack of light. So that's something that I, found really interesting to play with. Okay, so we just got like another minute and a half of this painting phase. And then sections 2, 3, and 4 are going to be a lot faster. And I don't think I'll stop as much, although you never know. Okay, so looks like I'm spraying some more greens and algae type things. I think in a second here I'll spray some blue, which I found really fun too. Yeah, here we go. So again, I mentioned the edges I tried to keep more black, and then sort of this middle to close zone I'm sort of blasting with some sort of ocean blue. And I'm hoping that once the resin is poured on top, right, the colors will kind of optically mix and we'll just get this feeling of water a little bit more. But another cool thing that I found with this phase was as I'm spraying the base, I think some of that paint is actually bouncing upwards. And here you see me just actually, here's in real time, I caught on to that and I start just spraying the underplanes or more of the downward facing planes of some of the overhangs. So the idea is called reflected light. So basically, if you imagine a bunch of blue water around this island, some of that blue reflection, I think, would be shining and affecting some of these downward facing planes. So yeah, I found that the pigment itself, shooting out of the gun at such velocity, it naturally bounced up and created some of that cool bounce light effect. Like it almost looks here like it is being illuminated by, some watery source, even though there's no water. And then again, with that idea of forcing or exaggerating things with the paint, I started actually manually plopping that blue into some of those areas too. So there you go. That's the painting phase. Okay. So let us check out. Here we go. So this is section 2. And section 2, I've called dry brushing and washes. So here, right, I think it's a little self-explanatory. And maybe one thing that's hard to see because it's off screen is I've taken some sort of gray, just cheap craft acrylic paints and sort of an old bristle brush, kind of, wiry bristles, and a paper towel. And I'm sort of grabbing some of the paint, unloading as much as I can off of the brush into the paper towel. So it's a dry brush, right? Not super goopy. And I'm just spreading that along the rocks. And, this is really helping kind of bring forward the detail, right? A lot of the peaks in the form. And one way I've heard this explained too in the context of an ocean diorama is like a sea salt from the water that's sort of dried on the rocks, which is definitely something cool to think about too. But even without that, right, just purely visually or abstractly, I think you can kind of see that it really brings out some of the inherent complexity and texture to these rocks that the softer passes of color might miss or obscure. yeah, so there, like that area that I'm doing right now, you can see it kind of transform. And yeah, this is, you know, one of the many parts of painting that I think it's not super skillful, right? Like I'm literally just running the brush across, you know, every part of the rock practically. And the textures itself, you know, are kind of doing the work. But I think just the experience to understand that you can't do this with a super goopy loaded brush with wet paint, right? That would just that would not work, you know, work well. So yeah, you know, knowing that you need the paper towel on hand and you need to be constantly unloading the brush so you can just sort of build this up. That's sort of the main trick. And again, yeah, dry brushing, totally viable and used in all sorts of other types of painting too. And this is going to take us into the next step. So maybe this section could be thought of as like the painting modifiers. All right, we did the bulk of the painting with the airbrush, and this is sort of, you know, modifying that. And here's the dark wash. So yeah, those channels I mentioned, those like Black Magic Craft, he's got a great video on making some of this dark wash for yourself. It's just a matte medium and some black ink, a couple other things. But yeah, so this sort of goes on top of the dry brushing, and the idea here is to pour some darker paint that is going to seep into all the little nooks and crannies of the rocks and help create more depth. So yeah, I am just squeezing it on there and with a brush kind of jamming that paint into those areas. One thing I found too with the way that I worked from light to dark, if you remember in the main painting phase with that bright yellow and stuff first, is yeah, in some of the areas I still had bright white or bright yellow color coming through in the deepest cracks because I did not start with like a dark base coat. So yeah, another food for thought for me to consider for future pieces is maybe just starting things off darker, you know, could help out in this way too, where like then the dark wash could really punch those things darker as opposed to still trying to get dark the brighter plaster, if that makes sense, because the wash is very transparent. And I just wanted to skip back here real quick. So yeah, I went back one more time here with the airbrush, and what I'm trying to do here is, let's pause it for a second. I've got the black on the furthest edge, that blue sort of more towards the middle, and now I'm trying to paint in a little bit of a tanner, lighter sand color, sort of at the closest, I guess, embankments, right? And that's thinking, you know, dark, medium, light from further away, and then the middle, and then sort of the foreground to the island. And hopefully when I pour the resin, you know, we'll just have a little bit more of this effect of a shore and then the ocean kind of, you know, declining and going deeper as we go into the blue and then the black area. And yeah, in some of the areas I felt like the black wash took away too much of the sort of highlights of the dry brush. So, you know, came back in here and did another pass. And yeah, layering stuff, you know, with your whole process, one thing on top of another, building it up, breaking it down. I always think of that painting with watercolors or even oils, right? Painting really intentionally and then softening and blurring the layers so they kind of diffuse and get smokier. I love that process. It's sort of this push-pull process where you're kind of kneading out the dough of, you know, your creation. And I love that. That's probably my favorite part of painting. So yeah, I think it's looking pretty cool. I'm happy with this. Crispy. Yes. Okay. So there you go. That is our second section. And let us go to the third. Here we go. So this is the flocking section. So here's me more in real time, just to show what it looks like to sort of, you know, disperse. This is actually called peat moss, and it's kind of like crushed up bark, wood dirt stuff. And yeah, I like to kind of drop that on there as a base to sort of emulate, you know, actual soil. And then I've got some, this is Woodland Scenics turf. So yeah, flock turf, same thing. And yeah, this stuff is used a lot for miniatures. I think, you know, I don't know if anyone out there is into Warhammer or Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. But you know, one advantage, let me go back again, I'm getting ahead of myself here. One of the advantages with this type of flocking is it's just little particles. They don't really have much height to them. So your miniature pieces, if you're playing with them, right, little bases and things are going to sit really well. But then there's another type of flocking too that I'll get into, and I'm still pretty new to it. This is probably the second piece that I've ever done with it, and that's called static grass. So I put that in as base, and here it is. This is the static grass applicator that I'm loading up. So static, literally meaning, you know, static electricity. So you'll see here, I'm pouring on some glue, wet glue, and then you set up this little piece. A little bit later, you'll see some slower, more zoomed in footage of this, but you're dropping in this base and attaching a wire. And when you press the on button, it's applying the static charge through the feet of the, you know, metal base here and charging the glue. And then the idea is the grass flies out to attach upright onto that glue. So long story short, static grass is all about getting actual upright vertical pieces of grass in your model. And yeah, depending on your needs or the purpose, you know, this could be good or bad, right? If you're trying to play with the miniature figurines, I think a lot of static grass makes for a less stable ground. But in terms of the realism and things, definitely cool to actually have some, you know, standing grass instead of just little tiny, you know, particles of the other type of turf. Okay, and then I paused here to show me here. I do a lot of this. I'm getting used to the tool, so I put some down and then I have to get in real close and stare and go, you know, did that even apply upright? Because if you don't do it right, you're just pouring a bunch of tiny static grass that's all scattered everywhere. But if you kind of get this right, so here I'm playing with different consistencies of the glue, thicker glue, watered down. Then I'll come in here and probably examine it. Yeah, so I'm just really trying to make sure. There we go. And here's hopefully a little bit of a closer shot. I'm still figuring out how to not block the camera. So yeah, you turn it on and hopefully you see the lights turn on this thing a little bit. Yeah, kind of hard to see from this angle. Alrighty. we're gonna go to the fourth and final stage. So here we go. This is the resin stage. So you might notice here that the piece is unflocked. So I actually did this phase before the flocking because I wasn't sure. I'll pause it for a second. If I wanted to, I thought I wanted to do the resin first. I'm not sure why. I think one advantage of doing the resin first is you pour the resin, it dries, and then when you do the flocking, all the excess particles of grass and stuff fall on top of this relatively flat surface of resin, and it's easy to clean up. I think doing the I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. I'm not sure exactly why I did it the other way around. I think because if you do the resin first and then the flocking, if the resin is not perfectly dry and any of that grass falls onto it, it gets stuck into the goop of the resin, and then you're stuck with it forever. So the real solution here is time management, I think, and not trying to rush it. Here I was sort of trying to do things a little bit too fast. So yeah. Anyways, I'm using some cardboard and some tape and some silicone gel to try to seal the edges here. Oh, maybe that's why I did this. I wanted that gel to dry kind of the day before I did the resin. So trying to get this step out of the way real quick. Yeah, and just sort of smearing that in there. Okay, then I did the flocking in the other section, and now I'm going to pour the resin. So yeah, this step is sort of the chemical moment of truth with your piece. I'm not sure if you guys have ever poured resin or worked with it before, but you know, it can be kind of volatile and scary. It's like toxic, I think. And you know, it's weird. I one time mixed some up in the heat with like under direct sunlight, and it like caught on fire. It combusted. So a lot of heat is generated as it's drying, and yeah, working under the right temperate conditions, and then especially quantities of the two-part, you know, resin and the hardener, important. So anyways, this is not a super technical video. It's not really meant to be. Again, check out the Real Terrain Hobbies channel, Neil, or the Black Magic Craft, or there's tons of other ones out there. If you're curious, you know, to see a little bit more, you know, the specifics of how to work with that. But yeah, off screen, I mixed up a bunch. I dropped in a little bit of blue coloring, and here I'm going to start pouring it on. So yeah, it's like, and if you pour it too thick too, it can crack. There's all sorts of issues, but it's so satisfying. You know, you finally get these reflections, this big illusion of a miniature model starts to feel a little bit more real, you know, actually getting to fill in, you know, into this basin of ocean or lake or whatever that you've crafted. Yeah, so super satisfying to pour it in. Kind of watch it level out. And it won't be featured in this video. But the next thing too is after you're done pouring your resin, you can use something like gloss gel medium or Mod Podge even, and you know, some sort of plastic adhesive pigment, and you can paint on top of the dried resin, and hopefully, you know, it dries clear, and you can actually paint with a brush ripples and effects, like actual watery texture. You could also opaquely paint with a little bit of white, some foam and bubbles and, waves and things too. So, yeah. That was kind of the first pour. And then here, I wanted to include this part. I was editing together this video last night, and I got to this part, and I guess that looks like I'm blowing. But here, I thought I was like having heartburn or something. I didn't remember doing this, and I was watching the video like, what? Like, did I black out and start like vomiting or burping? And then I was actually concerned. And then I was like, oh wait, no, this is part of working with resin. CO2 can kind of help pop and bring up some of the bubbles. Yeah, this is the, yeah, I was like, what is happening to me? Anyways, so yeah, I'm trying to hold back my hair from dipping into the resin and exhaling onto the drying resin to get those bubbles out. And you see them all start popping and stuff. It's really cool. And it looks like you are choking. Cool. So there you go. That is all 4 sections. And yeah, I kind of like how it's going. So I'm not sure exactly if I want to do, a whole nother workshop or session devoted to finishing this off. I don't think I will. Just kind of save that for myself. But some of my other ideas for this piece are to, put like little wooden doors in some of those cavernous areas, and imply little shelters and structures. I've been getting into 3D printing too. So I think it'd be kind of cool to print out little barrels or mugs or crates or, storages of food or who knows what, and sort of populate it with some other things. Oh, hey, Elsie, I just saw your message. No problem. Yeah, we just wrapped up pretty much, but feel free to, along with anyone else, of course, check out the YouTube. I'll just kind of give you a quick private tour, Elsie, of what we were up to today. We had four sections. Painting. Let's see, yes, I'm here. Okay. Painting, airbrushing, which is like the coolest thing. I'm addicted. I can't wait to try airbrushing on like actual canvas and stuff too. It is so fun. Just blasting color. Okay, and then we went on to part 2. Part 2 was dry brushing. Like, am I the student or the teacher? Part 2, dry brushing, and then dropping in dark wash of paint. And I think the technical term is it's starting to look crispy. Alrighty, and then part 3 here was adding in our veggies. So flocking vegetation, static grass, etc. And then at last, the resin pour. Yeah. And then me concerning my editing self looking like I'm choking, but I'm really exhaling carbon dioxide onto the resin to pop bubbles. Alrighty. So yeah, if anyone's watching this in the future or some other time zone, feel free to message me anywhere on our Instagram or on the YouTube comments. And you know, if you have any questions or comments or feedback, that'd be awesome. But yeah, other than that, wanted to keep this one kind of short and sweet. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.